Vignette 8. Defending the Malajat by Mohammad Shah Kakko and Abdul Ghani. The Malajat, the southern suburb of Kandahar, was a continuous battlefield. The Malajat is a large green zone full of orchards, villages, irrigation canals, and vineyards. The Mujahideen deployed mobile bases throughout. Many Mujahideen commanders with bases elsewhere would maintain mobile bases in the Malajat as their forward elements in the Kandahar area. Despite belonging to different factions, there was an exemplary cooperation among these mobile groups. The DRA Soviets tried to force the Mujahideen out by coordinated search operations of the Malajat area. They would occupy the high ground and villages north of the Tarnak River, Shorandam, Zakiri Sharif, Loy Karazak, Angurian, and Baladeh, which are north and west of the airfield. Then they would establish the western blocking positions on the Girwal Gar, Sufgar, Zaragar, and Chelzina Gar mountains, map 11-11 Malah. They used the city of Kandahar as the northern blocking position. Kandahar was occupied by DRA forces. Then the Soviets and DRA would push inward into the Malajat area from these blocking positions to search for the Mujahideen. They were usually unsuccessful, but they continued to do it over and over again. The blocking positions were also part of the Kandahar security belt, but it was well penetrated by the Mujahideen. We would fight them initially in the Malajat area and then exit to the south in the Loy Karzak area and Angurian, and in the southwest in the Hendu Kalasha area. The Soviets had trouble controlling these areas. The Mujahideen prepared blocking positions along major axes and turned this area into an impregnable stronghold. A typical blocking position would be built near a mobile base and include several buildings in a village or orchard where the mobile group would live. The personnel in the mobile group would be relieved and replaced from time to time from their main bases. Some Mujahideen would stay permanently in the Malajat area. Mobile bases and blocking positions were connected by communications trenches. The blocking positions were dug into the ground and had firing positions for machine guns, recoilless rifles, and RPGs. We covered the fighting positions with berry tree branches, which we then covered with earth and packed it down hard. The bases had covered bunkers to protect our Mujahideen from artillery fire and airstrikes. These bunkers were 2 to 3 meters in width and 6 to 8 meters long and were covered with timber and meter-thick layer of well-packed earth which resisted artillery fire and most airstrikes. Whenever the enemy would cordon off the Malajat area and launch infantry attacks into the green zone, the Mujahideen would occupy their blocking positions. Most fighting positions were redundant so that the loss of a fighting position would not adversely affect the defense. In the beginning, the Mujahideen were unprepared and unable to resist beyond 2 or 3 days, but after they developed their fortifications, they could withstand and push back the Soviets and DRA. Once the area was cordoned, the Soviets usually launched their attack along the main road from Zakiri Sharif and further south from Loy Karzak. In the north, the usual line of contact was Hokomati Dand, Paka Polan, Yak Karez, and Dekhwaja. This was just outside the built-up area. Later on, the Soviet and DRA forces established permanent, well-fortified, and well-protected security outposts. The Soviets had Shorandam Hill, Zakiri Sharif Hill, and Malakala Hill. The DRA had Sufgar, Zarashar Gar, and Chehelzina Gar mountain sites. Once every 2 months, the Soviets would launch a major coordinated search against the Malajat area in order to keep it contained. In November 1987, the Soviets launched an 18-day coordinated search operation. In the cold dawn, the Soviet and DRA troops moved from their position and by 0800 hours had occupied their normal blocking positions. Mohammad Shah Kakko's base was at Shiri Shur, where he commanded some 30 men. There were some 350 Mujahideen in the Malajat area from his party. The Mujahideen divided the front line facing western Kandahar into 4 sectors. Each sector had about 50 men. The northwest sector was a Hizbi Islami sector. The Paka Polan area was held by Mujahideen from Shir-e-Surik, Zakiri Sharif, and Kukabad. This meant that Mohammad Shah's Kakko sector had three commanders since there were three factions involved, but cooperation among the commanders was easy since they were all local and knew each other. Reggie was the third sector and Abdul Razak commanded this sector. Yat-Kharez was the fourth sector and Sarwanwal commanded it. Ghaffur Jan coordinated the four sectors. The DRA attacked from the city, but this time the Soviets did not move from their blocking positions. The DRA infantry were accompanied by troops carrying chainsaws. They planned to cut their way through the orchards, destroy them, and deny this refuge to the Mujahideen. We had planted mines in front of our positions, which deterred the poorly trained DRA soldiers. We maintained a steady fire from well-situated positions. We kept a reserve of 160 to 200 men in reserve resting. Every evening, the relief group would move forward, carrying rations, and relieve the force who would go back and rest for 2 days. Then they would rotate forward again. It was usually calm at night when we carried out the relief. In this manner, we kept up the defense for 18 days. We did not resupply during the day, but brought food, water, and ammunition forward only at night. The DRA could not break through, but they did cut some trees before we shot them down. It was winter and it was cold. Our positions were good, although resupply was tough. Throughout the fighting, the enemy bombed and shelled all suspected bases in the area. One bomb intended for our position in Pakapolan missed the target and hit the western city gate, killing many civilians. They could not hit us at the frontline positions because we were so close to their line, and so our front line was safe from air and artillery attack. Commentary. Throughout the war, the Soviets and DRA were never able to bring Kandahar under complete control. Mujahideen urban groups fought sporadic battles within the city walls, and Mujahideen mobile groups maintained control over the suburbs. Unlike other areas of Afghanistan, there was little infighting among the factions involved in the fighting around Kandahar, and the Mujahideen ran the fight cooperatively through regular meetings of a coordination council. This cooperation provided tactical flexibility to the Mujahideen, and their redundant fortifications ensured that Soviet DRA offensives would never progress far. Most notable is the regular rotation of Mujahideen from the forward positions. A relief in place is a difficult procedure for the best trained troops. The Mujahideen routinely relieved frontline forces without a loss in combat effectiveness. This is very important for any force, and even more so for a force that is in direct contact and is heavily outgunned and poorly supplied. There was a significant DRA Soviet force garrisoned in the area. The DRA 2nd Corps, 15th Infantry Division, 7th Tank Brigade, 3rd Border Guard Brigade garrisoned Kandahar City. The Soviet 70th Separate Motorized Rifle Brigade, the DRA 366th Fighter Regiment, the DRA 379th Separate Bombing Squadron, and a Soviet Spetsnaz battalion garrisoned the Kandahar International Airport. The DRA Soviet operations in the Malazgirt area were very predictable by time and location. They continually tried to penetrate and sweep the entire area, instead of cordoning off and sweeping a smaller section thoroughly. Although the combat in the Malazgirt area was a fight through a fortified area, the DRA Soviets continued to treat it as a penetration and exploitation rather than a systematic reduction. DRA Soviet tactical intelligence apparently did not pick up the pattern in Mujahideen resupply and relief activities to exploit it. Vignette 9. Battle for Chaharkulba village by Commander Akhtarjan. During the Soviet occupation, the eastern bank of the Arghandab River near Kandahar city was a safe haven, and the Mujahideen would not fight in this area. The west bank was Mujahideen territory. I had my base in Babur village in the orchards of the west bank. Later, after the Soviets withdrew, I established East Bank bases in Baba Velisheheb village, Piri Paymal, and in the western suburbs of Kandahar. My senior commander was Mullah Naqib. During the Soviet occupation, he had a remote base in Kakraz Mountain, but his base was in Charhakulba village. My eldest brother was killed in fighting at this village base. My next oldest brother fought out of the Babur base and became a commander when my oldest brother was killed. Commanders were selected based on the social position of the family, education, and personal leadership talents. Family ties were important. A commander brought his relatives into the group, and a prestigious family could raise a large group. Since my brother established the group, it was natural that my brother, and subsequently I, should succeed to the command. In fundamentalist Mujahideen groups, commanders were picked for ideological commitment and not for family ties. Many teenagers joined the Mujahideen because the DRA would press gang youth into the army, and Mujahideen bases were a good place to avoid the draft. In June 1987, during the month of Ramadan, the DRA Soviets launched a major operation in the Arghandab, map 11-12, Chahar. During the operation, the enemy concentrated in Nagahan and then moved northeast along the western bank of the Arghandab River. Another column crossed the Arghandab River from Baba Valiasheb. They began with a heavy air attack against suspected Mujahideen bases. We moved to our bunkers. The West Bank was actually a Mujahideen fortified zone, which we laced with bunkers, fighting positions, and trenches. Further, since the green zone was full of orchards, it was already cut up by irrigation ditches, so there was always a place to fight from. We did not leave the bunkers since we were pinned by all the aviation ordnance. Usually the Soviets would deploy tanks along the edge of the green zone, and after the heavy artillery bombardment and tank fires, they would send infantry, usually DRA, into the green zone with instructions to collect our weapons since everyone in the impact area would be dead. The infantry would move out confidently and the Mujahideen would come out of their bunkers. The Mujahideen would inflict heavy losses on the infantry and capture many of these ill-trained DRA recruits. We sent the prisoners north through the mountains and then, by circuitous routes, south into Pakistan. We had built a veritable fortress around the base at Chahal Kauba. Some Mujahideen would defend the bases, while others would range further afield to provide maneuver and depth to the battlefield. It was very hard to move tanks into the green zone. The Soviets would try to push tanks into the area to get close to the Mujahideen, but the terrain channelized their movement and made them vulnerable. The Soviets and DRA moved from two directions against the Mujahideen, but were met with constant resistance from Mujahideen fighting positions. Soviet tanks came from the Zardashta and stayed on the plain west of the green zone as they crept toward our base at Charkolba. It took them a week of fighting to cover the 6 kilometers to our base.